I get a lot of questions on how do I block sand my primer for paint? What do I use to block sand it properly? Am I going to wet sand the primer or I am going to dry sand the primer? Now there's two options you got. You can wet sand it or you can dry sand it. It all depends on the technique that you want to use. On this particular job, this is a 1965 GTO. And it's got a lot of body work on these fenders. Now the car itself, it's got body work too. So when you're working on these old classic cars, the best way to sand them is dry sand them. And the reason is because we're going to use two different grits of sandpaper. If we're going to wet sand it, we're only going to use one grit. But by using two grits of sandpaper, we're going to eliminate all the deep scratches of the bodywork, and we're going to give it that nice, super fine finish, that baby butt feel that everybody wants, and we're going to do it in a manner that's going to give us the opportunity to have a very, very slick finish. Come on in, join my friend Pete as we block sand these fenders and get them ready to paint.
Welcome to D.I.Y. Automotive School with my friend Pete. And Minnie, the body shop girl. It's everything you need to know about cars and more.
Now what I'm doing here is, on this particular fender, you see a lot of curves, a lot of contours going on. We got a curve that goes like this. The fender looks straight, but it's not. It actually bows out like that. Then you got the fender lip that comes around here, and then the fender lip also continues to ride all the way for front and then to the back. There's a little dip right here, and then of course it deadens there. So the first thing that I'm going to do to this classic car, and this is a situation that had a lot of body work. I welded up a bunch of holes over here from previous emblems, and it had dings and dents in it. Very, very old. Like I said, this is 1965. Is I'm going to go ahead and I chose to dry sand this. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this block. This is a rubber block, and I want to show this to you because it's not just any rubber block. So if you look at this block right here, I don't know if you can see it, so I went ahead and pulled another one out. You can see right here there's a line that goes down the center of that block. And what that block is actually two blocks in one. You got a firm side on one side and you got a soft side on the other side. Now the soft side would be used for scuffing stuff up, and possibly, like, let's say that you wanted to paint a bumper cover, we'd go ahead and do that. We'd use that for wet sanding, like for color sanding and buffing, for instance. But when it comes time to block sanding this, so we don't get a lot of ripples in it, we definitely don't want to use our hand. Do not use your hand and sand it down like this right here. If you use your hand, what's going to happen is it's going to put finger grooves all over, and when you look at it, when the light hits it, it's just going to look ripply and just god ugly, and you're going to be able to tell that that's the way you sanded it. So what I'm doing here is I'm not using the soft side of this block. I'm using the harder, stiffer side. I'm using the firm side. And the reason for that is like I said, if I use the soft side, what's going to do, it's going to create that primer. It's going to give it a ripply effect. I might push down harder here than I'm pushing over here, and you just don't know how it's going to end up. So it's always better when you're dry sanding your primer to use the firm side of the block. I believe these are made by a company called Steck. Now other companies make these. You got 3M, you got McGuire's, they make them. So there's a lot of companies out there that make these. I use these ones because you can buy a 2-pack. They're like $4 a pack for 2 of them, and they last a very long time. Another thing that I do is when I buy these, I specifically use them for one purpose or the other. And when I say that, these ones here are specifically designed, I keep them in my toolbox over here for dry sanding only. When it comes to wet sanding, I actually have another set of these that I keep over in my water buckets over there, and then I use those for wet sanding. So always try to have two of everything. When I say that, you got your dry blocks, and that's all you use that for is dry sanding, and you got your wet blocks, which is what you use for wet sanding. We could actually, if this was a brand new fender, and it didn't have no body work at all, and we were just sanding it to put it on, I would be wet sanding this with 400. Because I would know that there's no deep scratches in it, there's no body work on it, and there's no imperfections that I need to find. Another thing that we have done, if you look at this fender, we have created a guide coat. Now, the way that I do guide coating is I buy the cheapest, most inexpensive spray paint that I can find at your local big box hardware store, and we all know who that is. I believe that this is 69 cents, and I like to use the flat black, not the gloss black. The gloss black has a film to it that is hard to get off. Always get the flat black paint to use as a guide coat, and you can see I got my guide coat on here. Now your guide coat is used for two things. It's used to find all your imperfections in your primer, and it's also designed to make sure that you sand the whole thing, because without a guide coat, once you start sanding it and you get over here and you get over there and down here and there, you know, there might be several spots that you miss. So it's always good to always put a guide coat on there. You can see that it's very light. I don't need a thick guide coat. Really, really quick, just spray it on there and be done with it. They also make a powder that you can use, and a lot of people like to use that. I don't like the powder. But whatever, you know, turns your wheels and you think you need to use the powder, which costs a lot more than this 77-cent can of spray paint, then more power to you, buddy. So let's go ahead and look at the sandpaper that we're going to be using to actually do this job and accomplish what we need. Now, what you're looking at here, you got three grades of sandpaper. These are the main three grades that I use. Now, let's go ahead and get them in order here. We got 80 grit here. We got 180, and then of course we got 320, which is for our final sand job. That's going to be our paint ready situation right there. That equals, and I'm going to go ahead and say this, if you are dry sanding, I'm going to tell you the equalization between dry sanding and wet sandpaper. If you use 180 dry, that's the equal sanding of 400 wet. That's the same thing as if you sand your car with wet sand it with 400. You're going to get the same resistance, you're going to get the same finish if you use 180 dry. On 320, you're bumping it up to 600. So by using the two dry system here, we are eliminating the scratches by using our dry at 180 grit. This here cuts a lot faster than wet sanding, and it's going to give you a nice firm finish and a very nice sharp finish, if you can understand what I'm saying. And then we come back and we put the 320, which is going to be our finished sand, and that's going to be ready for paint. Now, on the door jambs, if I'm doing a door and I'm painting it inside and out, I only sand it to 180, that's it. I don't go to the process of 320. If it's door jambs, inside a trunk, trunk lips, this, that, and the other, something that's hidden or it's not seen by the visual eye outside of the vehicle, if it's something inside the car, I always stop at 180. That's it. I don't go to 320. I only use 320 on the outside of the car. Now, another thing I want you to pay attention to, the sandpaper I buy comes in a box. This is a roll. And it's very handy to have your sandpaper like this, because when you need some sandpaper, all you got to do is you pull it out of the box, just like this, and then you go ahead and get it to the length that you want, and then tear it off, and then we're ready for sanding. Now, when you came into this little video here, you saw where I was sanding this section here. And what I'm trying to say when I say section, I split everything up in my mind. I put a visual pattern on this fender and I split it all in sections. So this would be section 1 right here. And I can see where I missed it right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my flex blocks, and that's another reason we're using a flex block, because it will contour to that fit right there that we need to make sure that we sand everything. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this out, and I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it. That's another thing when you're sanding your 2K primer. Don't put a lot of pressure. Let the sand block do the work while you're guiding it with minimal pressure. So I'm just going to go ahead and sand that up, and you can see how fast it goes. And then I'm going to clear it off, and I'm going to look at it, and I still see a little bit right in this area here. And if you look right here where I'm talking about, you can see where the guide coat is, and you can also see the imperfection we're talking about, where there might have been some body work under that fender, or I'm sorry, under the primer. So I still got to continue to keep blocking that until it's a solid, bright white gray finish. You can see that I just started on this and I'm not even done with it yet. See the guide coat right here? See the imperfections we're talking about? You can see them, and that is why you use a guide coat. Another thing that's very important when you're block sanding your car or your body parts for paint is that you are in a very, very well lit area. I don't know if you noticed, but we're going to go ahead and scan the camera, and if we look up here, you can see I got lights on my walls. All right, do you see that? And then if we come across over here, you can see I got lights pretty much all the way around in this room right here that are mounted on my walls. And what that does is that brightens it up very, very nicely for me to actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to continue to finish section 1 using my flexible block, and I'm using the firm side of that flexible block. And I'm not going to get in a hurry because I don't want to bust through the primer. That's the main objective when you're block sanding. Don't go through the primer, especially after you've already done your body work twice and you've already primed it twice. Very important. So we're just going to take our time. I'm not using a lot of pressure. I'm not using my fingers, and I'm following the contour of the area that I am sanding using my block. And you can see how I'm using my block. I'm using all edges of my block. I'm not just using one section. I'm not pushing down real hard. I'm holding my block in a nice firm way where I'm getting a good overall sand job. Then I'm going to go ahead and visually and mentally inspect the area to make sure that I have sanded everything and all the guide coat's gone and I don't have any imperfections, I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and remove my 180, and we're going to go ahead and resort to our 320. Now, one more thing about using these rubber blocks I want to go ahead and let you know is eventually you're going to have to clean these off because the dust is going to get behind there and the sandpaper won't stick. And the way that you clean these off is you use a gray Scotch-Brite or a red Scotch-Brite and lacquer thinner. That's the only thing that will remove all the dust and impurities, or should I say imperfections, out of your dry block. You're going to use a Scotch-Brite and lacquer thinner, and then you're going to let it dry for about 20 or 30 minutes. So I thought I'd throw that in there for you as a tech tip from my friend Pete to you. So I'm going to go ahead and keep concentrating on section number 1 here. And normally what I would do is I would block sand the whole fender, which I'm going to do that when we hang up here. And then I would come back and block sand the whole fender using the 320. But since this is a lesson on what was going on, I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to concentrate on section number 1 here. And then once we hang the phone up with each other, then I'll go ahead and proceed to do everything else with 180 and then come back and overall it with 320. Now, another thing I want to mention is when I say I'm going to overall it, I'm even going to sand all these edges here. I'm going to get this back edge right here on the inside the engine compartment. All that will be sanded with 180. But I will not continue to take my 320 and sand the inside. That will be the limit. Remember what I told you, anything that's inside, we stop at 180, that's it. No more. Only the outside of the car is going to get sanded with dry 320, which will be consistent. If we were to sand it with wet, it would be the consistency of 600 wet. So I'm going to take my block and I'm going to do exactly what I did with the 180, and I'm just going to lightly scuff it down. You're not going to sand it as much using the 320 because all you're doing with this is breaking that top coat off of the 180 and blending everything in. And there you go, we're done with that. That's a done deal. I can feel it right here. If you were here, you would feel it and say, wow, I can't believe that. But a 320 dry finish is the way to go. Another reason that it might be a good idea to dry sand it is because when you wet sand it, and especially when you're painting something like this that's inside and out, because I got to paint the inside of this fender, when you wet sand it, you get all that muck and all that mud, I call it, all over the fender, and it goes inside and outside, and then you got to wash it off, and then you got to wait at least overnight for everything to dry properly and make sure that it's paint ready from the get-go. So, you know, it all really depends on this. This is the real situation. Whatever you feel comfortable doing, do it. If you like to wet sand and you're used to wet sanding, don't switch over to dry sanding. If you like dry sanding, then don't switch over to wet sanding. It's all in the way that you train yourself to do something that works for you. If you see people on YouTube or on the internet or you get on a forum and they say, don't dry sand, you need to wet sand, dry sanding it does this and blah, blah, blah. Don't listen to them. If you've already proven it to yourself that by dry sanding it works really good for you, then stick with that. Don't change. If you're sick and tired of all the dust flying in the air and getting filthy dirty from the dust that comes off it, you can see what's going on here, all right, then go to wet sanding because you don't have dust flying everywhere. All right, it's like 2 eggs over here and 4 eggs over there make 6 eggs. Or you could take 2 over here and 4 over there. You know, it doesn't really matter which way you sand it. It all depends on what the circumstances are, such as this. I want to break that down. I want to find my low spots. I want to fix my imperfections. And then I want to do a nice quick bam, and it's done. I like to dry sand more than I like to wet sand. That's just me. But I will wet sand when need be. Minnie the Body Shop girl, she likes to wet sand. So once again, it all depends on what you like to do. If you wet sand this, if I was going to wet sand this, I would only wet sand it with 400 and I'd be done with it. I would not go to 600. 400 is more than enough when it comes to paint ready. You don't have to take the 600. You definitely don't want to take it over 600 because what happens, now listen to this. What happens is if you go past sanding it, wet sanding at 400, the surface is getting so slick that you have situations where the paint will not adhere to the finish of the primer because it's so slick. If you go to 800 or you think you need to sand it with 1500, I'm telling you now, you're going to have serious problems. Maximum 600 wet and minimum 400 wet, and then that goes for dry sanding would be maximum 320 and minimum 180. This is Pete, my friend Pete, your friend Pete over here at D.I.Y. Auto School, hoping you are getting off your fucking ass. You're doing something with yourself. You're doing something with your life. You have a family that you love, and if you don't have a family, love yourself, because without you being happy, nobody's going to be happy around you. And you're going to be the most miserable son of a bitch that ever walked this planet. We'll see you later. Take it easy. We're moving to Moab, Utah sooner or later. I'm still in Dallas, Texas, sucking up the fucking humidity, sucking up the rain, and doing what I got to do to get her done right.
School. Classes don't stop till you know everything.